Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I travel a lot for work. My clients are scattered across different countries, so long-haul flights have basically become my second home. I've learned to pack light, sleep through turbulence, and tune out crying babies with a good pair of noise-canceling headphones. After years of this routine, I thought I had seen everything a flight could throw at me. I was wrong. It started in Dubai. I had just wrapped up a 2-week project there, and I was exhausted in that deep, bone-tired way that only comes from weeks of back-to-back meetings and long working hours. All I wanted was to board my flight, sink into my seat, put on a movie, and mentally check out for the next several hours. I had an aisle seat booked, which I always prefer on long flights. A little extra room goes a long way when you're stuck in a metal tube for hours. I settled in early, arranged my things, and let out a long breath. This was going to be fine. I just had to survive the flight. Then I saw them. A woman was making her way down the aisle with a boy who looked about 5 or 6 years old. Even from a distance, I could see the kid had that energy, the kind that makes your stomach drop. He was bouncing off the seats as he walked, grabbing at headrests, and making zooming sounds with his mouth. The woman behind him was scrolling through her phone completely unbothered. The moment I saw them slow down near my row, my heart sank straight to the floor. They were sitting right next to me. I told myself to stay calm. Kids could be manageable. Maybe he'd fall asleep after takeoff. Maybe she'd actually parent him. I gave myself a quiet pep talk and stared at my screen. Takeoff was fine. The kid sat still and even looked a little nervous as the plane climbed, which I respected. But the second we leveled out and the seatbelt sign clicked off, it was like someone flipped a switch. He was out of his seat and into the aisle before his mother even looked up from her phone. He started running. Actual running, up and down the aisle, bumping into the drink cart, throwing a small toy that hit the seat in front of him, and shrieking whenever he thought something was funny. I watched this for about 20 minutes before I said anything. I leaned over and asked the woman as politely as I could to get her son under control. She barely looked up from her phone and gave me a lazy wave like she was shooing a fly, saying he was just a kid burning off energy and I should relax. I looked around. Other passengers were shifting uncomfortably. A man across the aisle had his eyes closed but his jaw tight. A woman 2 rows up kept looking back with that exhausted, sympathetic look that said she felt my pain. Eventually, a flight attendant stepped in and told the woman firmly that her son needed to stay in his seat for his own safety and out of consideration for everyone else on board. The woman waved her off too, telling her to just ignore him if it was such a problem. The flight attendant stood there for a moment before composing herself and moving on. I put my headphones on and tried to lose myself in a movie. It half worked. I could still feel the vibrations every time the kid sprinted past my row. About halfway through the flight, I decided to order a Coke, not because I was thirsty, but because I needed something small that was just for me. I flagged down the flight attendant and asked for one. She came back with it a few minutes later. Cold, fizzy, perfect. I took one sip. That's when the kid locked onto it. His eyes went wide. He walked right up to my armrest, pointed directly at my drink, and started whining to his mother that he wanted it. And just like that, Karen put her phone down. For the first time in hours, she was fully present and engaged. She looked at my Coke, looked at me, and her entire face shifted into something expectant. She told me to just give him the drink. I told her this was my drink and suggested she ask the flight attendant to get one for her son. She seemed genuinely baffled that I would suggest such an inconvenient thing when I was sitting right there with a perfectly good Coke in my hand. I told her again plainly that it was mine and I wasn't sharing it with a stranger's child. She huffed and rolled her eyes, saying something under her breath that sounded a lot like selfish jerk. I sat there quietly sipping my Coke and I made a decision. I was going to enjoy every single drop of it, slowly, deliberately. Then I ordered another one. I flagged down the flight attendant and asked for a second can. When she came back down the aisle with it, The kid lunged for it, nearly knocking it clean out of her hands. The flight attendant turned to the mother and told her sharply that this behavior was unacceptable and could not continue. The mother looked like she had been personally insulted and demanded to know how the attendant dared speak to her that way, insisting he was just a child. The flight attendant held her ground, explaining that his behavior was disrupting other passengers and that she needed to keep him in his seat. The mother fumed. The flight attendant stood firm. Eventually, Karen turned away, shooting glares at me like I had somehow caused all of this. The kid, unsatisfied, went back to running around. We were maybe 30 minutes from landing when I hit my limit. The kid was still going, still in the aisle, still completely unsupervised, and something in me just settled into a very calm, very deliberate kind of pity. I called the flight attendant over and asked for one more Coke, this time in the can. When it arrived, I waited until Karen was deep in her phone and the kid was distracted down the aisle. Then casually, I gave the can a good shake. Not violent, just enough. I set it on my tray table close to the aisle edge and leaned back. I pulled my blanket up, tilted my head, and closed my eyes. Not all the way, just enough to look asleep. I didn't have to wait long. The kid spotted the can within 2 minutes. He crept toward it with the kind of focus he hadn't applied to anything the entire flight. I let him get close. Then I told him quietly that he really didn't want to do that. He didn't listen. Kids that age never do when they want something. He grabbed the can and yanked the tab open, and the Coke absolutely erupted. A full pressurized spray of sticky brown soda straight into his face and down his shirt. He let out a shriek that rattled the overhead bins. The can clattered to the floor, fizzing out the last of its contents across the aisle. Karen launched out of her seat and demanded to know what I had done. I told her calmly that I had warned him not to take it, and that his actions were his own responsibility. She insisted I had done it on purpose and that I had tricked her son. The flight attendant came rushing over, took one look at the scene, the sobbing, soda-drenched kid, the furious mother, the empty can rolling under a seat, and asked what was going on. Karen pointed at me and told her I had deliberately shaken up the can to spray her son. I told the flight attendant that wasn't what happened, that the boy had taken my drink without permission after I warned him not to, and that I couldn't be responsible for what he did after that. The flight attendant looked between us, then told me to make sure I didn't leave my drinks unattended going forward, and told Karen that her son had no business being out of his seat or taking things from other passengers. Karen demanded to know if that was really all she had to say after I had ruined her son's clothes. The flight attendant told her to lower her voice and reminded her, clearly and without apology, that supervising her child during the flight was her responsibility and no one else's. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, and the flight attendant was already guiding the sniffling, sticky kid toward the bathroom, calm and professional the whole way. Karen stood in the aisle, alone, with nothing left to direct her fury at. She sat back down. For the last 30 minutes of the flight, the kid stayed in his seat, wrapped in an airline blanket while his clothes dried, eyes red, completely quiet. Karen stared straight ahead, refusing to look at me. I put my headphones back on. The silence was genuinely beautiful. When we landed and it was time to deplane, I took my time. I arranged my bag slowly, checked my pockets twice, and made sure I had everything. I had no interest in sharing an exit with those two. When I finally made my way down the aisle toward the door, I caught the eye of the flight attendant who had dealt with Karen all flight. She gave me the smallest smile and a quiet nod. My parents were firm about one thing above everything else. You work for what you have. Nobody owes you anything, and you don't go around expecting people to carry your weight. That stuck with me. I'm not the type to complain, I'm not the type to ask for handouts, and I'm definitely not the type to get in other people's business. I keep my head down, do my job, and go home. That mindset had never once gotten me into trouble, until the day I stopped for gas. It had been a draining day at work. A project deadline got moved up, my lunch break got cut short because of an emergency meeting, and by the time 5 o'clock rolled around, I was running on fumes, literally. My gas light had been on for 2 days. I kept pushing it off, but I couldn't anymore, so I swung into the gas station on my way home, thinking I'd be in and out in 5 minutes. I pulled up to a pump, got out, and started swiping my card. That's when a beat-up minivan pulled into the pump right next to me. The driver was a woman who looked exhausted. Hair all over the place, dark circles so deep they looked permanent. I didn't think much of it. People have hard days. I was having one myself. I minded my business. Then the backseat caught my eye. Kids. 5 of them packed in like sardines, all screaming and climbing over each other. The noise was something else. I looked away and focused on my pump. That's when she called out to me. Just a sharp hey, aimed in my direction. I turned around thinking maybe I'd drop my card or something. She didn't waste any time and she told me she was in a bind, that she had 5 kids and no money for gas, and then asked me, a complete stranger she had never met in her life, to cover her tank. Just like that. No build-up, no shame, just a straight-up request like it was the most normal thing in the world. I genuinely didn't know how to respond for a second because nothing like this had ever happened to me before. I told her I was sorry but I couldn't do that I had my own bills to worry about. She didn't take it well. She told me not to be selfish and pointed toward the van at all the kids inside like she was putting them on display to make her case stronger. I kept my tone even and told her I understood she was going through something hard, but that I wasn't in a position to just hand money to everyone who asked me for it. That's when she called me heartless. She raised her voice and asked me if I even cared about children, loud enough that people at other pumps started looking over. I could feel my face getting warm. I'll be honest, I should have stopped there. I should have turned back to my pump, finished up and driven away. But being called heartless when I was just a random guy minding his own business after a long work day got under my skin, and I said something I shouldn't have. I told her that maybe she should have thought about whether she could support kids before having 5 of them. The moment those words left my mouth, I knew I'd gone too far. I was already pulling them back in my head, ready to apologize and walk away. But she didn't give me the chance. She exploded. Told me I had no idea what her life was like, and before I could get a single word out, she grabbed the gas nozzle from her own pump and started spraying gasoline all over my car. My car. I stood there completely frozen for a second, unable to process what I was actually watching happen. I shouted at her to stop, told her she needed to put the nozzle down, but she kept going like she couldn't even hear me. She soaked the whole car. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a lighter. Everything slowed down. I yelled at her not to do it. I don't even know if the words came out as loud as they felt in my head. It didn't matter either way. She tossed it. The flames caught instantly. The heat hit me like a wall and I stumbled backward. People started screaming. Someone knocked over whatever they were holding and just ran. A guy at the far pump took off without even hanging up his nozzle. Her kids were crying in the van, pressing their faces against the windows. And she just stood there watching my car burn with this wild look in her eyes, like she had just won something. She said loud enough for anyone nearby to hear that this was what happens when you don't help people. 2 gas station employees came running out with fire extinguishers before I could even find words again. One of them was already shouting for everyone to back away from the pumps, while the other was on the phone talking fast. The fire was spreading toward the pump island. If it reached those, we weren't talking about one burned car anymore. The employees worked fast and kept it contained, but barely. The woman's face changed when she saw how close the flames were getting to the pumps. That wild look in her eyes shifted into something closer to panic. She started saying she hadn't meant for it to go that far, but nobody around her was particularly interested in hearing it. Sirens came next. Fire trucks first, then police cruisers right behind them. Firefighters moved everyone back and got to work. Officers spread out across the lot immediately. One of them spotted the woman trying to quietly slip back into her van, like she was just going to drive away from all of this. An officer told her to step away from the vehicle. She started talking over him, saying she had kids in the van and needed to go. He told her to put her hands where he could see them and said it in a way that made clear it wasn't a request. She lost it when they moved to cuff her. She was screaming and thrashing, trying to pull away, and pointing at me the whole time, shouting that it was my fault, that I had refused to help her, and this was the result. I raised my hand slightly out of pure instinct when she pointed at me. The officers weren't interested in what she was saying. One of them recited her rights while they walked her to the cruiser and put her in the back. Another officer went to the van and crouched down by the window, talking to the kids in a calm, quiet voice until they settled enough to wait for someone else to arrive. An officer came over to take my statement. I walked him through the whole thing as clearly as I could, still half in disbelief hearing it come out of my own mouth. I told him she'd asked me to pay for her gas. I'd said no, and she'd responded by spraying my car with gasoline and setting it on fire. He asked if I'd known her before today. I told him I had never seen her in my life. I looked over at my car while he wrote everything down. It was gone, completely gutted, melted, black, hollowed out, just gone. The gas station manager came over a few minutes later looking shaken but holding it together. He apologized and told me they had cameras on every pump and that the police would have full footage of everything. Then he asked if there was someone they could call for me. I gave him my roommate's number. While I waited, I watched social services arrive and start working with the kids. I watched the fire crew pack up their equipment. I watched the officer who'd arrested her write what I imagined was a very long report. My roommate pulled up 15 minutes later with wide eyes, scanning the whole lot before he even got out of the car. He asked if I was okay and wanted to know why there were fire trucks everywhere. I told him he wasn't going to believe what I was about to say. He told me to try him. I reminded him of how we always joked about running into genuinely unhinged people out in the world. He said yeah, and I told him we weren't joking anymore. It came out later that this wasn't her first incident. She had a history. The charges she ended up facing were serious, including arson and reckless endangerment, and her children were placed in state care while everything got sorted out. My insurance covered most of the car, though not all of it. The gap came out of my savings. I got a used replacement, cheaper than what I had before, and the first thing I put in it was a dash cam mounted right on the windshield. I'm 29 years old, but I've spent most of my life learning how to survive my mother. I didn't have the kind of childhood where you look back with warm, fuzzy feelings. By the time I was a teenager, home had become a place I was desperate to escape. The tension, the unpredictability, the way she could make you feel small without even raising her voice. It wore me down over the years until one day, I just couldn't do it anymore. I packed what I could, reached out to a friend who lived in another state, and left. That living situation eventually fell apart too, but that's a whole other story for a whole other post. The point is, I got out. You'd think cutting ties would have been the natural next step after all of that, but I kept the lines of communication open. I'm not entirely sure why, guilt, maybe, or some stubborn part of me that still hoped things would be different. What I do know is that she has shown up at every major moment in my life and found a way to make it about herself or drag some new drama into the room with her. Graduations, moves, celebrations, she's never missed an opportunity. But I've gotten good at picking myself back up. I've had a lot of practice. So when she mentioned she wanted to visit during my upcoming time off, I didn't panic. My job is closing temporarily for renovations, which means I have paid time off coming up in a couple of months. She'd brought it up a few times over the past few months, and we'd talked through the details together like two adults. It wasn't perfect, but it felt manageable. Then the email arrived. I read it twice because I genuinely thought I'd misunderstood. She was letting me know that when she and her husband made the trip, they likely wouldn't have money for anything beyond gas to get here. No hotel, no budget for food or activities, just gas. And her solution? She planned to bring a tent for the two of them to sleep in, and she was asking if there was space in my yard. My yard. The yard that belongs to the house I rent. The house I do not own. The property I have absolutely no authority to offer up to anyone for anything, let alone as a multi-day campground with full access to facilities that also aren't mine. My first thought was that she was joking. It would not have been the first time she put me in an embarrassing situation just to watch me squirm before laughing it off. Once, in the middle of a packed shopping center, she pretended to have a disorder she absolutely did not have, complete with fake vocal tics, just to humiliate me in public and laugh about it afterward. So yes, my first instinct was that this was another one of those moments. It wasn't. When I told her no, that I couldn't make that work, that I didn't have the right to let anyone pitch a tent in that yard. She didn't argue. She didn't push back or acknowledge that what she was asking was wildly unreasonable. She just said it was fine and that she'd figure something else out on her own, as though I'd simply declined to pick her up from the airport and she decided to call a cab instead. I sat there staring at my screen, genuinely stunned. She was talking about driving halfway across the country as a grown adult who openly admitted she couldn't afford the trip. When I told her she probably shouldn't come at all given the circumstances, I braced myself for the response I knew was coming. Sure enough, she hit me with exactly what I expected. That wounded, guilt-soaked question about whether I even wanted to see them at all. There it was. I didn't have a good answer for why I hadn't cut her off completely. The truth is, I don't have one. I'm the only one in the family who lives out of state, and somewhere in the back of my mind I've always been afraid that cutting her out means losing other people I actually care about. It's not a logical reason. It's just fear. And before anyone asks, no, I couldn't offer to put her up in a hotel. I'm not exactly swimming in money myself. My household has more than one income, and we still somehow end up short before the month is over. I couldn't responsibly make a trip I can't afford, and I sure wasn't going to blow money I don't have on a visit that was already stressing me out. Then came the second email. Apparently, the entire story about barely being able to afford the gas was a manipulation tactic to make me feel sorry for her so I'd lower my guard about the visit. Because now suddenly, she was doing better financially than ever. She told me she gets great deals on hotel rooms because she works for a hotel brand, and that she had no real fear this trip would hurt her financially at all. She lied. Either she lied about being broke to play on my emotions, or she's lying now about being fine to calm me down. I genuinely don't know which scenario is worse. Both of them say something I already knew about who she is. I can't stop her from making the trip. She's an adult and she'll do what she wants. She always has. What I can do is hold my ground. The yard is not available. The facilities are not available. And whatever guilt trip she tries to pack into that car along with her tent is not going to work this time. I've had a lot of practice at this. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.